Hi there. Welcome to another edition of Talk Stocks. I'm your host, Keir Reynolds. And today we're lucky enough to have Chris Paul, CEO for Hercules Metals, trades on the TSX Venture Exchange with the ticker BIG. Big. Wow, those are some big shoes to fill there with that ticker. How you doing today, Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Kier. I do think it is definitely one of the better tickers. We are fortunate to have that thing locked down.
Yeah, and it looks like from the research I've kind of been doing, and for full disclosure, I've been a shareholder for, I don't know, probably going on about 2 years now, maybe a little more. And it looks like you got a sizable project, a big project. I think if I'm not mistaken, I was looking at some stuff in preparation for this, and you've got about 73 kilometers of like strike, this north-south sort of like strike on the project. So you got a big sizable project. Maybe for before we kind of dive a bit more into that, maybe you could give us a little bit of a background on who you are. How'd you get into the business? How'd you get to where you are today? Are you a geologist or more of a capital markets guy? Give us a little vantage point into who you are.
Yeah, for sure. My background, I am a geologist, sort of a geologist turned capital markets guy, if you will. But before Hercules, spent a lot of years up in the Golden Triangle of BC. So the previous company that I was kind of working with for a long time was a company called Golden Ridge Resources. So I was the vice president exploration. It was a small junior company. We had an old Barrick, or actually a Lac Minerals property, which was ironically it was an epithermal gold system that we discovered a porphyry copper system on. I believe it was in 2018. So it's a bit of a long story, but the company shifted focus to Newfoundland in sort of 2020. The project sort of sat idle. It's funny enough now in the hands of a company called Kingfisher Metals, which is run by Dustin Perry. Great company, by the way. I'm a big shareholder in that one as well. So Dustin's kind of picked up where we left off on that porphyry discovery. Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other story, but definitely one to watch. But yeah, I sort of wanted to change of focus in 2021. We sold our company Ridgeline. It was a private sort of consulting company. We sold that to Goldspot, and I wanted to find a good jurisdiction and ultimately landed on Idaho. It was, I like to go places that aren't very crowded. BC as a jurisdiction, and I think Canada as a whole, is a very crowded space for mining. Mining is in our blood. And whereas you look at the US, not so much, right? You do have Arizona and Nevada, but the same sort of geological belt, there's Idaho sitting right there. No one's playing in it. Politics are really favorable for mining. I mean, this is a population that is very, very supportive of natural resources. Let's just put it that way, very conservative state. And so we sort of fell upon this silver project called Hercules. And Hercules, if you will, started its life as a silver company, right? We were Hercules Silver in 2022. We bought a project. We bought it. We didn't option it. We paid about $350,000 total for 100% interest. It was a project that hadn't been worked in about 40 years. Since the 1980s, but prior to that, there was 300 holes drilled. A historical resource was put together, probably around, sort of the ballpark around 24 million ounces of silver. So, pretty decent start. And essentially, our focus was to sort of, explore the system at depth that had never been looked at, sort of deeper than 100 meters, really. So all that historical drilling was sort of average depth of around 90 meters. Ultimately in 2023, we drilled a deep hole that pretty well changed the trajectory of the company entirely. And we discovered a massive porphyry copper system. Barrick came in, invested about $25 million into the company. And that's what we've been plugging away at ever since. So kind of a long-winded way to sort of summarize getting myself to where I'm at today.
Yeah, and I guess Idaho was not something that was really a really popular kind of jurisdiction, and I guess arguably you and a couple of others have really put it on the map. Also, we're seeing with what's going on with reshoring and the national security of like critical metals. US has now become a really top sort of jurisdiction for mining speculators like myself. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to sort of have you on. It looks like you got a exploration stage project that already has yielded some great drill results, indicating there's probably size and scale to it. You're in a favorable state. You've got a large project sort of footprint, so lots of room for sort of like expansion, and then obviously with what's going on with investor interest and the momentum that we're seeing on the federal level on the U.S. Moving things forward. Thought it was an ideal time to sort of get you on. So appreciate your time. Maybe sort of give us an overview on this project. It's called the Leviathan discovery. Is that what we're talking about there? Maybe you could sort of like walk us through, like, you got your one big sort of discovery hole. Maybe you could explain a bit about that. Barrick came in as sort of a strategic investor. Amazing to have. And then what's kind of unfolded since? How much like work have you kind of done since?
Yeah, definitely. And I'll just touch too on what you mentioned at the first part about Idaho and about the US. So when we first got down there, it was 2021. People hated Idaho, right? When we first ended this project in, and I remember trying to raise money, and there was a very negative sentiment around the state of Idaho. And the reason being, was it was viewed as having permitting challenges. And the reason for that is a company called Perpetua Resources, right? Which at the time had sort of been trying for like 10 years to get this very challenging, environmentally challenging project off the ground. Now, this was a sort of a World War II open pit. They mined it for antimony and then sort of left a big mess behind. This was a bit of a super fun site. So that was what the challenges were there. But they got it done, with a promise to sort of clean up the land with the money. And I'm not sure if you followed that whole story, but I mean, I think JP Morgan just put $400 million in that company at the end of last year. So that's been a massive, massive, massive turnaround on that whole narrative of you can't permit it, you can't build in Idaho. But the other big turnaround, so the thing to understand about Idaho is there's a lot of federal U.S. Forest Service land in Idaho, which is sort of on the more difficult side to permitting, more lengthy side of permitting, right? Well, I mean, two things to that. Number one, Hercules, the Leviathan discovery that you just mentioned, is not on for federal Forest Service land. We are on a combination of state land, which is very, 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 very different, and essentially private land where we own the surface mining rights, right? So it's a big, big difference. Obviously, critical minerals, including copper, have become a pretty key focus now for the federal administration. So I feel like we're just kind of in the right place at the right time for Trump administration to come in and just change the whole landscape for permitting on federal lands in the U.S. too. But yeah, with that said, we started with this big silver system, about 3.5 kilometers long. Like I mentioned earlier, it hadn't been explored in 40 years, right? So what happened was they put together this, call it 24 million ounce historical resource. They wanted to go into production, but for some of your listeners, may be familiar with this Black Thursday event where the Hunt brothers, they ran silver up to $50 an ounce, and then they basically changed the rules and they had to sell everything.
Margin requirement. Yeah.
Margin requirements got changed and it crashed. Well, guess what? Silver came crashing down to about $5 an ounce. And it stayed there for 20 years. So from the 1980s, so the mid 80s to the mid 2000s, silver was in this horrible bear market. And the project basically got sort of abandoned, right? During that, it was 20 years. So we come along in 2021, 2022, silver's $20 an ounce now. It's starting to look good again. But obviously, we got to now go back to basics because there's been no modern exploration here. And so you start doing the kind of soil sampling and the mapping and more importantly, geophysical technology, which has come a long way, right? So geophysical systems today can see down orders of magnitude deeper than any of the systems they would have been using back in the 60s and 70s, right? And so we start running these geophysical surveys, this IP, and we're seeing this really, really, really big anomaly, and it's below all the historical drilling. Now, initially, our focus was to try and grow this silver system in the vertical dimension, because that's the part that hadn't been tested, right? How much can we grow this? And there we are seeing this big anomaly. And meanwhile, we've done all this soil sampling and kind of other work. You could smell this sort of porphyry copper flavor in the air, right? Like there's a lot of porphyry copper smoke, but there's no real walk-up drill targets.
Yeah.
For that copper. And so we end up drilling this anomaly. We end up drilling this big geophysical anomaly. And that was our 5th hole that we drilled, right? So it was the first deep hole ever to be drilled. This was 2023. And that hole intersected 185 meters of about 0.84% copper, right? Which is remarkable grade for a porphyry copper system. And it ended. We actually lost that hole, and it was still going in 0.5% or over 0.5% copper when we lost that hole. So when you press release a new porphyry copper discovery, the first ever porphyry copper to be discovered in the state of Idaho, this is a big deal in itself, right? Because the majors of the world, there's just no inventory in the market right now for these large copper systems, right? That are actually in safe, stable jurisdictions like Idaho, where you could actually build a mine. So not only does it represent a new porphyry copper discovery, which porphyry coppers are the largest types of copper deposits in the world. These are the ones that the big boy companies want their hands on. But it also represents potential for many, many, many more, because these things occur in clusters and belts. And then you add on the fact that 0.84%, that's incredible great for porphyry copper systems. So the majors, they all sort of came down, and we ended up seeing this bidding war between Barrick and some of the others that were down there. Ultimately, like I mentioned, Barrick won that, and they made a $25 million investment. And that's Leviathan, right? So we call that discovery Leviathan, right? The monster of the deeps.
Yeah.
Sticking with the Greek mythology.
Nice. That anomaly that you were talking about, the IP, how big was that sort of anomaly? Like, if you could put some dimensions on it, what were you guys kind of seeing before you went and drilled?
Yeah, so that's a funny story. We only had a couple $1 million that we raised, right? So the first raise we did, I think, was like 7 cents with Crescat in beginning of 2022. So that money, little tiny bit of money, was used to go and do the greenfields work, right? So all the soiling and the geophysics. Now, the geophysics was the last thing that we did in 2022. So, you kind of want to get all your surface stuff done, and then you decide, where do we like the most? That's where we'll run the geophysics. And so I kind of mentioned earlier, we saw the copper smoke, but there was no real walk up drill targets here. So we said, you know what? Let's just focus on what we came here for, which was the silver system. It's 3.5 kilometers long. Let's just, we only have a tiny bit of money left. I think we could afford maybe 6 lines of IP. Not much.
Okay.
Not much.
Yeah.
And so we ran these lines. They're about 3.5 or maybe 4 kilometers long. And 6 lines, maybe a couple, I don't know what they were. It was maybe about 1,000 meters by about 3,500 meters was the survey area. Well, guess what? The entire survey area, right, at depth, right, the lower limit of the survey, the depth of investigation, the entire thing lit up.
Wow.
So it was unconstrained at that point, right? So it was at least 3.5 kilometers by, whatever it was, maybe 1,000 meters. It wasn't until the following year in 2024, maybe? Yeah, maybe it was 2020. Can't remember. The following year, 2023.
Yep.
Yeah, it was after we drilled, I think, the discovery hole. So that fall, we brought the geophysicists back out and we surveyed the whole property. Yeah, everything. Yeah.
Yeah, you had $25 million of Barrick's money, and you got to go actually do the full thing. So since you've sort of done that, how are you finding in terms of correlation with drilling and the IP? Is there great correlation? Are you learning things about it? If it was easy as flying something and drilling, and you're going to hit every time, well, we'd all know exactly where to drill and where not to drill. So, what can you from your technical background explain a little bit about kind of how accurate it is and what it's sort of telling you?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, we do not get a one-to-one correlation of pink blobs with resources, with mineral resources. Unfortunately, that would be very nice. I would put it this way. So IP sort of gets you in the ballpark. It's a tool, right? And just like anything is a tool. Like, so, you run some soil sand, you have a nice copper soil anomaly. Well, all that's really doing is telling you, okay, here's your ballpark, right? So there's something in here. But to sort of follow on to that, the problem with the IP, I would say, which is IP is the gold standard in porphyry exploration, right? It's sort of meant for porphyry systems, disseminated styles of copper. It works very well. The challenge with IP is, number one, is you can't do IP at a district scale. Right? You can't do 73 kilometers of IP. It just doesn't work, right? It's you got to run wires, and it's logistically, you got to have road access, all this sort of stuff. So you can only scale out so big.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I should mention, right, that Leviathan is the monster of the deeps. So it's not sitting right at surface. We have a silver system sitting right at surface, but the Leviathan's underneath all that. And so what that means is, when you're running these surveys, you got to basically send your electrical current down into the ground. It's got to go through that silver system, which is going to add a lot of noise. So all your data is basically going through this other mineral system first, and sometimes it's very conductive, and sometimes the current just stays in there. We decided this year, 2025, to try a new type of survey, right? So we switched to a new technology called MT, so magnetotellurics. So MT is sort of been catching waves lately with the majors and the big companies as this sort of new and upcoming tool for big, really big porphyry exploration. MT, you don't actually bring your generator. You don't actually have to inject a current into the ground. You're using natural electrical currents from lightning strikes and all sorts of other stuff, right? So these currents and these really low frequency currents are already deep down in the ground. So with MT, you can effectively, your depth of investigation is up to 6 kilometers, right? So these porphyries, these really big porphyries that have vertical extents that are on the order of 2 kilometers of vertical extent, MT is the way to go. And so we brought that out last year. The first phase, to kind of circle back to the original part of your question, the first phase of surveying that we did, and we surveyed 100 square kilometers in phase one, right? Big area, 1 kilometer station spacing, because you don't need to run wires. Well, it correlated almost perfectly with the known mineralization, right? So we've got a block model that we've sort of done internally, right? So it's a southeast dipping, sort of tabular body of known copper mineralization we've drilled across maybe 1 kilometer. Well, the results come back. We survey this massive area. There's really just one anomaly, and it's lining up near perfect with the known mineralization. So where that gets interesting is that same anomaly that's lined up with the known mineralization actually continues for another 5 kilometers to the south, where we haven't yet drill tested yet. So the thinking now is like, my God, we've actually really probably only tested about 20% of the total system so far. And there's a lot left to go. So we did another phase 2 on that. We just put those results out in a news release. And it's looking like there's probably up to an additional 3 intrusive centers along trend to the south, which we're going to be testing this year.
And so that's a good segue. Maybe we could take this back to like your discovery hole. How much drilling has now been done since that sort of monster hit, 185 meters of 0.84%? I think you had almost 2% for about 45 meters within that as well. So pretty juicy grade, very high grade for porphyry. And like you said, Idaho wasn't known for porphyry. What work has been done since? How many meters of drilling? Approximately how many holes? And what sort of scale now, the dimensions do you have to this thing?
Yeah, so I don't actually know the exact number off the top of my head, but I'm going to say it's somewhere in the neighborhood of about 30,000 meters. I'd say we've done now on Leviathan. Now, you mentioned a good point, right? Again, like I said, this is the first porphyry system to be found in Idaho. Okay, so we're sort of the trailblazers on this whole thing. It's not easy, as it turns out. We basically have to sort of unravel this puzzle ourselves as we go and drill through, a bunch of cover rock first before we get there. So it's a slow process. The one thing I will say is drilling here is very challenging. All of Idaho and Nevada, that's the one downside to this part of the world, is the rocks are tough.
Yep.
There's
You
been a
lose
lot
you
of
lose you lose some drills, hit some dikes.
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the cost of doing business, right? In these complex mineral systems. I guess the bright side of that and all this faulting that we have is, we're now seeing at least 3 separate mineralizing events that have actually happened in time here. Which we can sort of get into that maybe later on. But we've defined about 1 kilometer of strike so far. I'd say at the widest part of the system, which is actually the last news release we just put out, that cross section, the total mineralized width is about 750 meters wide. Yeah, so it's getting big. I have no idea, what the size is because we haven't done an MRE yet.
Right.
But I'd be surprised if it wasn't in the multiple 100 million tons. I think that's probably safe to say, right, at this stage, just given the scale of how much of the system we've drilled so far. But how big it's going to be, we have no idea what the real limits are at this point.
Well, that's very exciting stuff for sure. So, yeah, you did put out a pretty interesting drill hole not too long ago. Maybe you could explain to viewers. You just put it out, I guess, a week or two ago. What was sort of what was the length of that drill hole, and then what were the results, and what was it kind of testing?
Yeah, so I mentioned the discovery hole I think it was 185 meters, right? But we ended in mineralization, so we actually lost the very first hole that we drilled. We're now finding, with like recent holes like what we put out last week, that we're getting 400, 500 meter long intercepts now, and we're drilling across the system. We're drilling perpendicular to the intrusive center here, and that was something that took almost 2 years of drilling, right? So at the end of our 2024 drilling season, our technical team was able to take all this oriented core drilling data and actually develop a 3D geological model, right? So then we understood the actual geometry of the system, right? We knew that it was dipping to the southeast. So when we came back this year in 2025, we started turning our drills around and drilling to the northwest so that we could actually drill across the system. And we began a program of sort of systematic grid drilling, 200 meter centers, one at a time. This hole that we just put out last week was a great hole, definitely one of our better holes, if not maybe the best hole that we've drilled so far. It's just, you know what it is? It's just definition drilling, right? You're going to get bangers in there. You're going to get bad ones too. You're going to get duds, but you're going to get bangers like this hole 15 that we put out last week.
Right, and that was. If I'm not mistaken, it was around 113 meters of 1.38% sort of copper equivalent. Or is that pure copper?
Pure copper.
Yeah.
We don't report equivalent. I think we did one release, but we don't report equivalent.
Nice. And what sort of depth are you sort of seeing this? Like you'd mentioned that you originally were interested in the project because of the silver. I guess I've heard it be like a silver blanket. And then where are you kind of finding the copper? Sort of what sort of range are you kind of, where do you start encountering it?
Yeah. So on the east side of the deposit, it comes the closest to surface. So it's probably within 70 meters of surface on the far east side. But then the cover sort of thickens in a bit of a wedge. So as you move to the west side of the deposit, the cover probably starts to get to about maybe 300 meters thick, right? So we drill angled holes. So if, let's say, the mineralization starts at 400 meters, but you're drilling at a minus 45, the true depth below surface is maybe only 200 meters below surface. Now, of course, that cover that we're drilling through has like you mentioned, a silver blanket within it, right? Which, there's a lot of really like bulk tonnage disseminated low grade silver in that cover, which weren't at all interested in 2022. We were only focused on this high grade stuff, right? Because there are high grade pods and zones and shoots, but kind of everywhere there's a bit of an ocean of low grade as well. And so obviously with silver price doing what it's doing now, the big thing on our minds is, can we do an open pit optimization study in which this whole thing is just one large giant open pit?
Well, that's pretty cool. That's exciting. Look forward to hopefully reading up on that study whenever you start and finish that. Maybe just going back just a little bit, you talked about this being kind of the first porphyry kind of in Idaho. Are you finding this like pretty conventional in terms of the rock that you're finding, the geological sort of type? Or is it sort of a newfangled sort of like beast? Is it similar to what you find in BC or completely different?
Completely different. Yeah, and the big difference is we have something very special that happened at Leviathan, getting back to these multiple mineralizing events. So we had something that happened here, which is called hypogene enrichment. So what does that mean? Well, the original porphyry system that formed was probably pretty conventional. It was probably pretty normal, maybe 0.4, just sort of anywhere and everywhere, sort of homogeneous. What happened at Leviathan is somewhere near the end of this porphyry's life. Maybe this had a million-year life. This is back 205 million years ago. It was forming off of the Pacific Ocean, just before the dinosaurs started walking around. And as its life was coming to an end, there was sort of another sort of pulse of heat and fluid that came through. And what that did is it sort of remobilized all that copper in your conventional porphyry system. And it actually focused a lot of it up into the shallow parts of the system. And so you got this kind of blanket sort of type geometry of like, 2% copper, 45 meters of 2% copper, like in the discovery hole. That was where that enrichment got focused into the top of the system. So that hypogene enrichment is pretty special. And then what's kind of really interesting is then later in the Jurassic, when the dinosaurs are now walking around, 20 million years later, there's another mineralizing event. Lightning strikes a third time, and you get this epithermal silver system deposited on top of all that. So kind of a crazy series of events if you really think about it.
And for those that are a little bit less technical, you typically have like you'd have a supergene kind of enrichment. And, the general grades on those, what are like 0.3, 0.4 sort of percent, they tend to be, if you look at sort of global porphyry, sort of copper mining. And those are fairly sort of common. But for somebody who's not, super technical, maybe you could break it down for investors a little bit, the difference between hypergene and supergene.
Yeah. It's a topic that's come up more times than I can imagine here, right? And it was one of the big things that Barrick tried to figure out at the beginning, because supergene enrichment is common. It's relatively common. Hypogene enrichment is very, very rare. Like I can think of maybe 5 systems in the entire world that have had hypogene enrichment, and these are like some of the best systems of the world, like Philo, Resolution in Arizona, Onto in Indonesia. I mean, when it happens, it's pretty remarkable. But supergene enrichment is the common one. So supergene you get quite often in South America. It's very typical. And what basically means is that these porphyries come to surface, and then you're starting to erode it. Right? So
Right.
Erosion is starting to remove it. But instead of just removing the copper, if you get the right conditions, you get a lot of acid. There's a lot of sulfides that are weathering, acid rock drainage, right? That kind of happens at mine sites. Well, that acid rock drainage can actually dissolve the copper from the near surface.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of just flushing away off into the Pacific Ocean, it goes down to the water table, and then it reprecipitates again. And so you got to get this over time as that process continues and continues and continues. As erosion starts to wear down, the copper continues to build because it doesn't go away, and it just concentrates into this blanket called a supergene enrichment blanket. Now, these can get up to 1% copper, or maybe even higher, but they're often not very big. That's
Right.
kind of the issue with supergene enrichment. You need really, really, really specific chemical conditions. You sort of need the perfect storm to form them. And quite often the scale is just they're not tremendously big, these supergene blankets. They can be nice little bonuses sometimes, but they're not massive bonuses. Hypogene enrichment, on the other hand, which is what we have, is also enrichment. It also forms kind of at the top of your porphyry system. It also concentrates copper, but it does it on a much, much, much bigger scale. It does it with hydrothermal fluids, right? So the same fluids that form the copper in the first place and form this mineral deposit in the first place continue operating after the deposit forms, adding more copper and sort of remobilizing copper and really helping to focus and channelize it into a very, very concentrated area. And the scale can be tremendously huge with hypogene enrichment because these hydrothermal systems, you can think about it like the hydrothermal system that formed the porphyry in the first place, which is kilometers by kilometers, right? Big hydrothermal system, is the same one that then forms that hypogene enrichment system, right? So it's scale is really the key difference.
Excellent. Well, it sounds like you got it, and it's a nice company to have with this hypogene. Like you indicated, there's some pretty monstrous mines and projects that relate to that. So it does sound like you're living up to your ticker with what you got there. Maybe you could walk us through sort of what work is, what are you doing right now? You put out some results recently on drilling. Are you guys, currently drilling? Are you planning drilling? What are some of what's 2026 sort of shaping up to look like for you?
Yeah. So 2025, one of the challenges we had was the assay turnaround was very slow. So we've actually still got a number of holes still to report from our 2025 drill season. We've made some major changes at the company. That's going to be much, much faster. We've changed the assay labs. We've added core cutters. We've just basically increased our capacity to turn around results much, much quicker in 2026. Now, so we have a number of holes still to report from 2025. Virtually zero snow in this part of the world at the moment. So effectively, this is a year-round exploration season this year. We are paused. We had to pause for Christmas because the drillers wanted to go home for Christmas.
Sure.
And of course we're going to allow some of these other assay results to come in and sort of update our model. It's sometimes it's good to take a pause on things, let things catch up. But we're going to be drilling again very soon here. So there's still $10 million left in the bank, and there's 2 holes that are in progress. Were in progress just before Christmas. We paused those holes. We're going to basically go back and just put the drillers back on the rigs. The rigs are still sitting there. Fire them up and just keep those holes going. And so yeah, we're really it's just a continuation, 2026, of what we were already doing, which is definition drilling on 200-meter centers, growing this deposit. The difference with this season now is we've got this new MT data now, right? And we just put out the results of the second phase of that survey. The second phase, what that did was it basically went to this big anomaly, right? So we had the anomaly lined up with the normalization, extended at 5 kilometers to the south. Well, we basically just infilled that one anomaly because we want to see what's actually going on within this anomaly. We need better resolution. And what we saw, and we put out some images of this in the last release, is there looks to be these discrete conductive centers within that overall anomaly. So instead of one giant 5-6 kilometer long by 3 kilometer wide blob, we're sort of finding blobs within blobs now, if you will. And these are cylindrical shaped, right? So sort of similar to the shape you would expect for other porphyry centers. And that, I guess, for their non-technical audience, this may all be one giant long porphyry system, but quite often these porphyries, the reason that they can stretch for kilometers and kilometers is there's more than one of them, right? So these intrusions, these magmatic intrusions that come up and they bring copper and molybdenum and silver, there could be one center and then another center and then another center and then another center, and they're all sort of lined up along this trend, and they all sort of give off mineralization in all directions, and that sort of coalesces, if you will, into one big giant super system. And so that's kind of what we're looking for as explorationists. We found one intrusive center, which we call Leviathan. The question is now, are there other intrusive centers along trend as we start to test the rest of this conductive trend to the south?
Wow, very cool. Sounds like we all get porphyries. You get a porphyry. You get a porphyry. We all get porphyries. So, anyway, some exciting stuff for you to unpack. There was some exploration, and that's a testament to the size and scope of the actual sort of footprint of the project or the permitted and staked area that you guys have. You guys don't just have a little sort of postage stamp, but you've got that. You got make sure that you've got this thing. So in terms of some of the drilling, like you indicated that you've improved some things so that you can get faster turnaround. Are you guys deploying things like directional drilling, to be able to wedge off other holes, in order to cut down on having to go through the barren sort of or out of the porphyry system? I guess not barren if you got a silver blanket, but you know what I mean.
Totally. Yeah. We looked into wedging in the past. So wedging is very well suited in, for example, Quebec or Ontario, in these deep Archean lode gold systems where, if you can imagine, you might have a very high grade vein, gold vein, and it's like a meter wide.
Sure.
And it goes down like 2 kilometers.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
So wedging, you drill a parent hole, right? Typically vertical.
Yep.
And then, maybe you get 1,000 meters down, and then you start wedging off. And now with these Archean lode gold systems, you got to get really tight drill spacing on that vein. It's very nuggety, right? You got to hit it all over the place. And that wedging works really good because when you wedge, the drill will actually only deviate off of that wedge by a few degrees. Okay. So this is something I learned a couple years ago. You can't wedge something and make it wedge like 30 degrees. Like you can't change the drill direction that much off of a wedge. So what that means is when you have a giant porphyry, which is typically very homogeneous, it's not nuggety like a little high-grade gold vein. You need to be able to drill these things on like 200-meter centers.
Right.
As opposed to like 20-meter centers with the gold vein system.
Wedge is pointless.
So the wedge, unfortunately, it doesn't work. You just got to do it the hard way.
Great. Well, thanks for answering that. Good. That's a great, thanks for educating us on sort of what that's all about. Again, you hear this terminology used all the time, and then what's it's actually like in the field. So there you go. So the directional drilling is not all that really directional, just a couple of degrees at a time, in terms of the wedge. You guys have a little break. You got how many drill rigs do you guys typically have turning when you do have these things turning?
Yeah, so I think we had 5 at one point last year. That was sort of up at the peak. There's 3 different companies. One was an RC, right? So it's a lower cost per meter than a core rig. That is sort of used typically to get through the cover, right? So that's one way to sort of get through the cover. Without going into too many details, that can also cost money as well. So the money you save and the lower cost per meter, you can quite often end up giving back a lot of that because you have to leave casing in the ground and you got to move 2 rigs instead of 1 rig onto the same path. So I don't know that we're going to do that again anymore. We sort of tried for a couple of years and we keep managing to sort of break even with the RC drilling. But we've got one company that we've really liked. So after 3 years of drilling in the US, we decided that we needed to bring Canadian drillers down to the US because I'm sorry, but most American drillers suck. I'm sorry. It's not everyone. Okay, there's good US drilling companies. There are good ones. Like Ruin Drilling is a company in Idaho, for example, that is very good, but good luck getting them in a bull market, right? Like they're working for Teck or the big boy companies, and they're very, very hard to secure. And getting back to the crowded market in BC, there's a lot of drillers in BC, right? You think about it. It's a very, very, very busy space. So there's a lot of quality and there's a lot more of them. And so what we did is I said, well, guys, you got these really good drillers, Dorado Drilling, right? A great British Columbia Canadian company. You got lots of really good drillers. You're working up here in a very crowded market, competitive, right? There's lots of drilling companies that you're competing with. Come down to Idaho. There's no one here, right? There's exploration companies. There's barely any drilling companies down here, and so that's what they did. They incorporated the U.S. That was last year, and of all the companies we've ever had, they were the best. So they're coming back, no doubt, this year. So we've got 2 of their rigs. And there's one other group that we're talking to right now. We haven't signed anything with them yet. We're sort of still in the negotiating the drill contract phase, but I'm optimistic we'll have a second core drilling outfit out there as well. So that's probably what this year is going to look like: 2 Dorado rigs and maybe 1 or 2 other core rigs from this other company.
Excellent. And just in terms of like the elevation and what this sort of project looks like as compared to like doing business in like BC, where a lot of it's like helicopter assisted sort of like drilling, and obviously very short drill season due to like the winter conditions and seasonality. What's it like with this project in Idaho?
Yeah, I mean, infrastructure could not be better. So elevation, I think, is around 1,200 meters, something like that. As mentioned, there's been no snow at all this winter, so it's very mild. Sometimes you get a foot of snow, but that's about it. Topography is not rugged; it's rolling hills. There's a state highway, running directly across the project. There's 3 high voltage transmission lines running directly across the project. So the Hells Canyon hydroelectric dams are about 15 miles away, right? So all your power generation, I think it's Idaho's biggest power generating station, is 15 miles from the project, which means all those transmission lines, which are running to Boise and wherever, are going directly across Hercules. So if there was a mine that were to be built here, all you need to put it as a substation. You would be the first customer along the line. So you'd be looking at very minimal power loss, right, from the place of generation to the project. Idaho's got some of the lowest cost electricity in the United States. It's clean, it's hydroelectric. You got water. You're 2 hours from Boise, right? So a major regional supply hub, skilled workforce. And yeah, you compare that with BC. You even compare that with Philo, world-class discovery. Philo is just an absolute stunner of a discovery, but that's up at 5,000 meters elevation on the border of 2 different countries. There's no water. There's barely any air.
Yes.
That got bought for what, $4 billion or something like that by Lundin and
Yeah.
BHP. This is a lot better part of the world to be finding a big copper system, that's for sure.
Well, thanks for running through the infrastructure. Sounds like a pretty ideal setup there. Very important when we got to, go through our due diligence and tick the boxes. So that's good to cover. Now let's talk cap table. Approximately, how many shares are outstanding?
Yeah, so I think we've got just under, I don't have it in front of me. There's like maybe just under 300 million shares outstanding. There's no warrants. So the last deal we did was in August. We raised 17 million, and that was a no warrant deal, right? So that's kind of the stage that the company's at right now. Barrick is still our largest shareholder, right? So they're sitting at around 12%. We've added a number of other long-term institutional shareholders to the register as well. Jupiter's just under 10%. So yeah, the cap table is looking good, and like I mentioned, there's probably just under 10 million in cash left after the most recent 2025 drill campaign. So that's enough to get us up and running again here. Continue the holes that were paused. Obviously, we want to start testing some of these new MT targets that we're pretty excited about. And then, yeah, obviously at some point in 2026, there will be another capital raise that will happen when the time comes. We've always been very opportunistic about capital raises. Typically try and tie them on the back of very good news events for the company.
And your market cap today is approximately, it's sort of just over 200 million, 220 million or something like that.
Exactly right.
And you're sort of your pre-resource. You haven't done a mineral resource estimate. There's 2 schools of thought on all that. First off, you have to complete enough drilling to be able to like have enough competency to put a resource together. But also sometimes companies can put a resource or come out with a resource a bit early when there's still so much exploration potential, and it can be a little bit of a double-edged sword. What's your sort of thought process on that? You got a 225 million market cap. You got a project. You've got some tremendous drill holes. Are people starting to bug you? Like, hey, are you going to put a resource out?
Yeah, yeah. So we are, and that is the next sort of step for 2026. There is, like you said, there's a lot of exploration potential. Obviously, that's still left here, but I do think it's time, given the amount of drilling, to start to show the market, hey, here's where this thing's at so far. I think it's going to be bigger than most people are imagining at this point. So what we're going to do is we start with what's called an order of magnitude study. What that is basically it's an internal MRE, right? You just sort of do it quick and dirty. You do it in-house, and that's either going to say, well, look, this is pretty good. The drilling you've done so far was on a grid. Just let's make this 43101 compliant. Or listen, there's some big gaps in here. You guys should probably put a hole here. These holes are too far apart, right? You can't do inferred because they're too far apart. You know what I mean? Sort of tells you where the gaps are left to fill. I imagine there's probably going to be a couple gaps still left to fill. We'll fill those, right? That'll be part of this 2026 drill program. And then hopefully by maybe Q2 or Q3, we can begin the true 43101 compliant MRE and show, hey, here's what's here so far. Right? This isn't the end. We're not done.
Sure.
This remains an exploration story, but I think it's going to be nice to show how much is here already.
And in terms of drill spacing and things that you've kind of done, are you thinking that an initial one would be mostly like an inferred, or would you have tight enough spacing for it to have some measured or indicated?
Yeah, the goal has always been inferred, and that's why we did the drilling on 200-meter centers to begin with. So that's where we're going to start is start with the inferred, and then obviously, when we want to increase that, you just come back and you infill that, right? When we infill at 100 meters or whatever.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. And then, sorry to jump back, but your last financing that you guys sort of completed was, I think, this past summer. How much was sort of raised, and like what terms were you guys having to give away, like warrants, or was it a straight share?
Yeah. So there was no warrants. We raised 17 million. It was mostly institutionally led. It was a life deal, so it's free trading. And that's about it. Yeah, it's just a simple deal. It was co-led by BMO and Canaccord.
And well, that's good. And so no warrant, straight life offering, straight share, free trading. What do you think about those sort of life offerings? There's two schools of thought on that as well. Some companies and executives love them, and some of them not so much. After you've completed some, what are your thoughts on it? And you're also a pretty active check writer, so what do you think about this life offering structure?
Yeah, look, the reality is this. It's simple. If you're a 200 million market cap company or less, and you go to raise money, sure, you can ask, you can say, I want 4-month hold, but you're going to have to give more up.
Yeah,
right? You're either going to have to give a bigger discount,
and warrant.
or you're going to have to give half warrant. So, what do you want? Yes, you're going to get some flippers for sure with a life deal. You're going to get that. Those guys are probably going to be selling 4 months in one day on a typical private placement anyway. So you may as well just rip the Band-Aid off, and then you don't have to give away a warrant or a deeper discount. So I prefer the life deal. Some people disagree, but that's me.
Excellent. And so why don't we just this has been a great overview. Looks like a great project that you sunk your teeth into. Congrats on the success that you've had so far with it. Really exciting also for just the general metal space to make a new, discovery somewhere where there hadn't been these porphyry. And as an investor, how many times have you heard, oh, there's a buried porphyry there? And companies spend so much money and don't find it. So it's really nice and rewarding that you've had some payoff here. And also you've allowed some payoff for investors at initial discovery and some of the excitement, tremendous liquidity, tremendous price appreciation. So also making money for those early speculators. Like you said, you had some early guys in at, sub 10 cents, and, your stock hit I think it was $1.80 or something during that sort of initial run up. So just tremendous sort of potential capital gain on that discovery. So exciting stuff. Let's just recap some of the catalysts that we as an investor can look forward to this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the big catalysts for 2026 are it remains the exploration upside here, right? So you know, like you said, we made a massive discovery in 2023. All the people that got in the 7-cent round with Crescat made a ton of money, right?
Yeah.
Probably gone at this stage. The stock trades a lot of volume. We've been flat for a long time, so we got a new cost base here around 70, 80 cents. Now it's time for the next big catalyst, right? We've been flat for a while. We're going to go out and hopefully hit another barn burner in the near future. I think we're ready for that now. I think we've got the data. You know, this discovery was made using geophysics. This initial discovery was made using geophysics. We are looking for needles in a haystack. That is the reality with mineral exploration. And this district, this belt, is almost entirely covered. So these porphyries are just simply not outcropping at surface. They are concealed. But we have a tool now, which is pretty good at detecting, as it turns out, pretty good at detecting these needles. We saw that with the phase 1 MT lined up 1 for 1 with the known mineralization. So now the big $1 million question is, what are these other lookalikes sitting directly on trend to the south that haven't been drilled yet? Is that the next catalyst? I don't know. It's exploration. There's risk, right? But that's the business.
Right. So anyways, that's some very exciting potential re-rating there if you're successful on that. Are you guys utilizing, it's a question, you guys utilizing any other new sort of AI sort of stuff? Is there any interesting tools, interesting tech that you guys are testing out or trying or have had some success with that you want to talk about? Is it a part of, you're a little younger than the average sort of geo and maybe a little bit more open to trying new things? What do you say? Anything you can comment on?
We had a conversation with the Verify guys. I think it's a very interesting technology. But what Verify told us, and we agreed, was that their system just doesn't work for concealed deposits, right? It's just not what it's designed for. So their system, it's AI for generating targets, right? For drilling.
Yep.
But it's based on surface data.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to have soil sampling, mapping, all this sort of surface data, and then it basically looks for patterns. Okay, what did the surface, all the data you collected at surface, look like over the discovery? Well, when you've got post mineral cover that's younger, that doesn't really work. So they're working on another system, I know, right now, which is more for sort of the brownfields type of
Yep.
exploration targeting, but it's not there yet as far as I'm aware. I don't know. Are there any other systems out there? Like I've only really talked to Verify. I'm totally open to it, but it's obviously a very new thing, and that's about all I know for now.
Yeah, that's okay. It's a question I ask. We hear a little bit about it. We've heard, just outside of mining, we've heard about some new technology that maybe is unearthing some interesting systems below the pyramids over in Egypt and stuff like that. So, always a question to kind of ask about, what's happening in modern sort of exploration. And you got a few billionaires that, are throwing money in behind newfangled sort of AI for copper discovery. So yeah, it's a good question to ask. But Chris, I really appreciate your time. What's a wrap up, or what are a couple of thoughts you'd like to leave prospective investors who are considering buying your shares or investing in you? What would you like to leave them with today?
Yeah, definitely. Well, look, I think if I were a prospective investor and I was going to do my due diligence on Hercules, I would focus you right now on, pull up maybe the news releases for the past year. Look at the cross sections, right? Look at the sections we've been putting out, and try to get a sense for yourself. How wide are these things? What are the dimensions of what these guys have drilled so far? What do I think maybe the size of this Leviathan thing is so far, right? And is that worth more or less than 200 million? Will it work as an open pit because you've got this massive silver system sitting above it in the cover? One of the biggest knocks I'd say with Leviathan is it's deep, right? And people say, well, is it going to be underground grade? I would say we've drilled a lot of very long intervals of 0.6 and obviously shorter intervals of 1% plus, which are certainly underground block cave grade of the 1% plus material. 0.6 probably borderline at $6 copper, but certainly getting there if the copper price raises any higher. But obviously the big one is silver going to $80 where it's at now. Look at the last news release. Look at the amount of silver that's sitting in the cover rock above that, and then just sort of imagine what a bowl shape would sort of look like around both the silver and the copper, and then try and calculate for yourself, well, what's the gross metal value here? Right, so there's this many tons. It's probably an average grade of this. You get some pretty big numbers. At least I do when I start to run the back of the napkin stuff myself. So that's what's there so far. As mentioned, I think that's probably only 20% of the system has been tested so far. So we've got these other things, these sort of lookalike things now along trend that's going to be drilled this season. I don't think every single one is going to be another Leviathan, but if just one of these other things that look like centers is another Leviathan, well, obviously there's massive value in that there. So we remain an exploration stock, but I think we found a lot so far that probably 200 million is not really quite doing justice to at the moment.
Well, excellent. Great way to sort of wrap that up. I feel the same way. That's what I've been doing on my channel recently is kind of covering copper stories. We covered a lot of silver, a lot of gold. We were early in gold. We were early like in silver, talking about silver before it was sort of like popular. And copper's looking really interesting. Another company to sort of have a good look at here in Hercules. So really appreciate this. This sort of concludes our first look. Chris, look forward to staying up with you, and maybe we can get another one of these in the books in the next few weeks when you have a little bit of a break. We can do a bit more of a page flip and actually show kind of some visuals in terms of cross sections, targets, talk about specific targets. Maybe you can show some of that surveying sort of data, and then how it's sort of been one-to-one so far, and then what it looks like. Left untested. So anyways, really appreciate your time, Chris. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Kier.